This week I thought I'd take the time and talk about the most stressful and frustrating time of my life so far. And it all happened this last year. Yeah, you know. Top 10 would be insurance, Medicare, hospice, in-home care, the wife passing. Then you have life insurance, 401k dealing with, medical bills, Social Security, retirement. Oh, that's just the top 10. And if that wasn't enough, well, let's throw in there not once, not twice, mind you, but try 3 times of experiencing also fraud. Yeah. Let's talk about number 1, insurance. Oh, yes. My wife and I never really thought much about it. She'd been working for Winn-Dixie for plus 25 years and had insurance. I mean, it was through Blue Cross, Blue Shield. Good company, right? Never think twice about it, until you need to use it. Yeah. And that's when you start reading the fine print. Yeah. Oh, I got the fine print right here in case you're wondering. Here's the fine print. Let me see here. See? Hold on. Grab my glasses. I don't know why I took them off. There we go. That's a lot better. Pre-authorization is required. Yeah, that's in the fine print for any hospital emergency stay. Really? Who would ever knew that, So that was one of the main things that we ended up having a roadblock with right off with day number 1 of when my daughter had finally convinced my wife to go to the hospital. My wife made it a big deal to Deborah, our daughter, that she wanted to go to Orange Park Medical. In her mind, that hospital has been around ever since she's been here in Jacksonville, and that's where her mom always went, and that's where she wanted to go. If she was going to have to go to the hospital, she wanted to go there. So we didn't know we had to pick up the phone and had to make sure that it was already going to be pre-authorized. So that's just the beginning of the iceberg of that particular one. Yeah. So that brings us to number 2. Yeah, number 2 would be Medicare. That's what the hospital wanted. They didn't care about Dorothy's insurance. Eventually, 3 days later, they did get paperwork coming in through the hospital office or what have you that, yes, okay, yeah, it is authorized and certain payments will go through Dorothy's insurance of Blue Cross Blue Shield Florida, which is I think she had a PTO plan through her work, but regardless, on the surface, when you just hear the name Blue Cross Blue Shield, there's a lot more to that than meets the eye. Of course, nobody wants to find out the hard way, and finding out the hard way is when you're already in the hospital. Now you're finding out, but the hospital, what they wanted is they wanted her Medicare number. For the life of me, I couldn't find that anywhere. I had to come back to the house, search up and down, and figure out where in the heck did my wife put her Medicare card. For some reason, later in life, she didn't ever like the idea of having everything in her purse and taking everything with her. So she kept the majority of stuff all in a separate little pile that I found out later where to actually find it. And because she would always just grab her license and the credit card that she was going to use, and she would stick that in her pocket, and we'd be on our merry way. Again, we never thought about that. What happens if we get, you know, in a hospital somewhere and then you don't have this information? And you would think that all you would need is your social security number, right? One would think, social security number should be able to connect two and two and put two and two together. Nope. That didn't work. Yeah, so what if you had her social security number? They wanted the actual, what is her Medicare number? Well, at least I was eventually able to find that. And then there was a point there where I was actually even panicking about the fact of, I assumed that she had the Medicare. We never really talked about that much, I knew she was collecting Social Security. She did make a big point about that back when, I think it was when she turned 67 is when she decided that, I should go ahead and start taking the Social Security. I still want to work, but I'm going to head and start taking my Social Security. Okay? And that's fine. It's good for me, no problem. And I think also the other thing about the Blue Cross Blue Shield is that part of the plan through Blue Cross Blue Shield was them knowing that she also had Medicare. So that's where the hospital, I think, nowhere came into play of, nope, we want the Medicare number. But just, giving the Social Security number doesn't work. So make sure you know where those numbers are at, because you're going to need them someday. And then that would bring us to number 3. Hospice. Yes, sirree. They were in to come see me and see what was going on the very second day of Dorothy's hospital stay. They already had the information that they knew, that they wanted. Hey, we have somebody in ICU, and, it doesn't look good. They already took care of her brain bleed, but of course, she ended up having a stroke during that process. And then they found out that she also had stage 4 cancer. But, of course, a lot of all that information that they already knew, unfortunately, I wasn't being told, nor was my daughter being told. It wasn't until about day 2 or 3 that we really started to get the story together on what was going on. And it all because the fact of the hospital, I think, dragging their feet because they wanted to make sure who was going to pay the goddamn frickin' bill. I mean, I hate to get mad about it, but you have to get mad about it sometimes because that's what it came down to. Again, and that's when hospice came to see me. Again, they were trying to bring up the records. And again, so I had to go back here to the house again. And that's when it wasn't until like the second or third time of me tearing this house upside down is when I finally found proof that yes, she has Medicare. And then everybody was happy. Oh, the hospital wasn't happy. Hospice was happy. And now everyone's going, we can all go down this merry path together and, and everything's going to be better. That's what you think. Which brings us to number 4. And number 4 would be in-home care. Now, hospice was going to take care of in-home care. Okay? Because that's what I wanted. I wanted Dorothy to come back home. And thankfully, she was able to come back home. It was short-lived, not like neither myself or my daughter was hoping for. We were thinking that we were going to have a little bit more time than what was, happening, but we had no control over that, and somebody, up above already had plans for what was going on. But she was able to come home, okay, after 10 days of being in the hospital, and hospice had set things up here to be able to bring in a bed and stuff like that to make things a little bit easier on me. And then somebody would show up every single day and help out. And so they would do a daily visit, basically, and see how things were going. But Dorothy wasn't in the state of being able to be here by herself while I had to go back to work. Because I had to go back to work, I was still employed at, Dollar Tree. I've already taken time off. Not once, but twice, so I've already taken a couple weeks off of time off of work. And so my daughter was going to do that, fill in, come here to the house and take care of the time that I would have to get up in the morning and then leave and then come back home. And then she'd leave and go back home. And, that worked out that was working out fine. But I knew that that wasn't going to be a permanent situation. So I started looking around. I need somebody to come in, at least, not every single day. Just basically, I was thinking at least twice a week, maybe 3 times. And that would give the opportunity of Deborah not having to be here all the time, every time I have to go ahead and leave to go to work. It would give the opportunity of being able to, make that run to the store or whatever to get groceries for that day. To be able, I knew it needed to happen. My daughter was already talking about the fact of, well, maybe she can come and just live with us. She already wanted to go that way. I didn't want that. I wanted my wife to be here at home. So I had found somebody. They were going to come in, and they were going to stay a couple days a week during the time frame that I would be at work. So I was going to get charged for somebody coming in and basically babysitting my wife for an 8-hour shift while I was gone at work. And that was going to cost about, back at the beginning of the year, they were saying that was going to cost about $25 an hour to have somebody come in do that. Well, that's fine. Didn't think nothing of it, I figured, well, I'll just go ahead and use one of my credit cards that we have nothing on. Guess what? These companies, no. They're not going to accept no credit card. Nope. They want a direct deposit every single week through your checking account. That's what they want. Well, so much of the idea of, my wife and I always thought that, hey, we have 2 or 3 credit cards. We paid them down. There's no balance. But that's a security net, Well, that 60 grand that you're thinking that, you'd had there for an emergency purpose isn't necessarily always accessible for being utilized for that true emergency purpose that you might think of. Yeah. So that was not a problem. We had that all set up regardless. I gave my checking information and all that good stuff. And unfortunately, I never had to use the company when we had made the date for them to start that exact same weekend when they were supposed to go ahead and start that following Monday. She was back in the hospital, back in hospice care, and it was only a a half dozen days basically before she actually passed. So I never had to actually spend the money with that company, but I was ready to, and I thought I had, you know, I thought I had a game plan figured out but until they came up with that. Yeah. So where are we at on my list here? So that would be number 4 with in-home care. That brings us to number 5. And then we come to number 5, and that would be my wife passing. Now, to this point, everybody in the family knew what was going on, and everybody came to visit. But as far as anybody taking the time and right then and there and actually physically talking about, so what we're going to do, nobody wanted to talk about it. It was said probably briefly, and always with the topic of, well, I'll talk to you later, or I'll pick up the phone later, or whatever, right? Yeah. Well, that never happened. And of course, hospice, guarantee you, they're not going to let you drag your feet like that. They want you to go ahead and figure it out. And so that's probably my fault. I felt the pressure, especially when that day actually came and I was there and it happened. And I did whatever paperwork then or made a decision, and I was happy with it. Well, of course, later I find out that no, my daughter in particular was not happy with that decision. So based on that alone is why our relationship is what it is. So please take that time. And nobody wants to talk about it, but yeah, that would be, if it's like things are not bad enough already, right? With dealing with the insurance and Medicare and hospice in general, and then that's a big blow right there, So that brings us to number 6. And number 6 would be life insurance. Yeah. Well, so you try to start to get some information on Dorothy's life insurance. Well, you have to prove who you are. Yeah, they don't believe who you are, and they're only going to talk to me to begin with. But you can't talk to anybody. You have to talk to only one particular person, like at Winn-Dixie, has that information or will tell you that information. Well, you have to wait until that person's back in the office. They should be calling you. Well, then you're playing this phone tag kind of thing, Meanwhile, I'm still trying to, keep things here at the house going, and trying to keep, the dog calm and not tearing up the house, which she was doing. Yeah, she was going through her own little grieving thing. I come home every single day and find a new area of the home tore up, And I understand why. It's because she was going through where's Dorothy? That dog's always been used to her being here 24/7 because Dorothy worked at home all the time. So, yeah, that was a big change, Number 7, that would be 401k, which also goes in the same ballpark of life insurance. That same person at Winn-Dixie, yep, that's the person you need to talk to about her life insurance. That's also the same person that you need to talk about her 401k. Only she's authorized to give any information, and only until after they prove that, yes, who you are and all that good stuff too. So where are we at here? Number 8. I just actually took a break and went in there to double check to make sure in case it comes back and bites me. And I wanted to make sure I told the right number. But yeah, medical bills. So yeah, Okay, so we figured out that yes, Dorothy had insurance, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and the insurance was there, and then also uh, Medicare. Medicare is going to take care of basically the majority of all that good stuff, right? Well, regardless, there was 8 different companies also involved that were never part of the first equation of the insurance, the Blue Cross Blue Shield, or being paid through Medicare. So there was 8 different companies involved of medical bills that directly associated with a 10, basically with that 10-day period of being in the hospital, because she went to the hospital for those 10 days, was able to come home, was able to have the in-home care, which that part was taken through care of, through Medicare. But there was that additional 8 different medical bills, Of course, that's not including the other bill, which was the fact that I decided to go ahead and I thought that was the most easiest thing that I knew that I really believed that my wife would want and I wanted, was just a simple cremation. So I took care of that bill. So yeah, you got those, you got those medical bills out there too that, nobody wants to talk about stuff that families get hit with, but yeah, you don't realize how many there are until they come knocking at your door, and then of course everyone has their own opinion. Oh, don't pay it. So-and-so should pay it. The insurance company should be paying that, and Medicare should be paying that one. And, when all is said and done, it came down to it, no, there were still 8 different companies out there, So that's just something to keep in mind. That brings us to number 9. Oh, number 9 is that's a whole that's a definite video just on its own. Of course, all these are merit, their own video just alone. Believe me, there's enough information there to go a deeper dive in every single one of these. But when it comes to Social Security, oh, that's definitely one, One thing about Social Security, as soon as Dorothy was admitted to the Orange Park Medical Center, and they got her verified that she had Medicare and was in hospice, well, that's Social Security check that she was getting every month sent here to the house. Well, actually, it wasn't sent here to the house. It automatically was being deposited in our checking account. Well, that came to a halt right away. It then took me all that hassle of going through Social Security and proving who I was and proving that, yes, I was the husband, and yes, we were married for 32 plus years, and yes, I want to go ahead and get Social Security spousal insurance, And while I'm at it, I want to find out about retiring, and while I'm there, I want to get all these questions answered, Well, like I said, that's a whole different topic. That's the one that took the longest. Why I kept working until May, because I needed to make sure that all this was set up, and that money that was normally coming in would still be coming in. The other thing that stopped extremely right off the bat too was that exact same thing with Dorothy was still getting paid through Winn-Dixie, but they didn't have to pick up the phone, and I didn't have to call nobody. They were just like Social Security. Yeah, Winn-Dixie, they knew right off the bat that Yeah. Yeah. Dorothy's no longer with us. Those checks stop. You know? Which is fine, I understand, but it's amazing how these companies can stay on top of something like that when it comes to, if they're paying you something, well, they're going to stop it right away. Oh, went out again. So that brings us to number 10, retirement. You know. So you got all this going on, and this is a daily routine. You're getting medical bills in the mail. You're getting phone calls all the time. You're trying to make sure that the electricity's still on. Because one of the things that my wife always did is, well, for starters, she was an accountant. And that was her job. So, ever since we were married, that's basically what Dorothy did. Is she always made sure that, the light bill was paid. And, I've never come home to the house where, there was no power or something. Actually, that did happen. But guess what? It only happened one time. She made sure of it, too, that it never, ever happened again. So, we always had food on the table. Lights were always on. I never complained about it. Now, I don't think it's funny, but it was one of the things that was brought up in 2024 quite a few times. I would start asking, what if? And I never got very far with that conversation. And I wish I would have, because it would have made things easier. But Dorothy, every time I talk about, passwords, this and that and the other, what would be your preference and all that. So at least I had an understanding, where to find this stuff and, how to go about it. Because everything we talked about, there's a password, there's a PIN number, there's an account number you need to know. But she took care of all that. I had no clue. I had no clue when I went into the computer room and tried to get on her. I tried to get on her computer in there. And then that was the very first thing it asked me. What's the password? Well, what the hell? So I'm sitting there racking my brain. Okay, so what would the password be that my wife put down here on the computer? Well, I finally figured that out. Well, that only helps so far if you know how to work Excel, because that's where she kept everything, was on Excel spreadsheets. And then, of course, it only helps too if once you find that Excel spreadsheet that shows that, hey, these are the passwords, only if it's updated correctly is that being the correct password. Yeah, because later she would forget the password or mess it up, have it reset, have it written down somewhere on a scratch piece of paper somewhere that she knew about. But oh yeah, so, and here's the kicker: to make things worse, guess who else knows when somebody passes away? Yep, that's when I got hit. Not once, not twice, but 3 times from fraud. Yep, it's like they know, hey, we got this person here that I bet you, with everything that's going on in this person's life, I bet we can go ahead and try to get 400. Oh, let's try 400 3 times out of their account and see how long it takes them to put 2 and 2 together. Maybe they won't realize it and they won't make it to the bank in time. Well, I did make it to the bank in time, so I was able to take care of all that. But in the process, That means that everything gets put on hold. Yeah. Now I've just shut down my checking account, which means I have no access to my money. It means also the previous accounts that I was able to figure out, able to reinitiate, be able to tell them, yes, who I am, and be able to figure out things like the light bill and actually start paying the light company. Yeah, you can't even make a payment. You think that'd be one thing. I'm trying to pay you, please take my money. No, it's lot more difficult than you think, You're trying to pay somebody. Nope, because it was in her name. And the reason a lot of things were in her name is because it made it easier for her to take care of something when it needed to be taken care of, because they could just talk directly to my wife. And whatever situation was going on, or she needed to readjust a payment somewhere, she was able to take care of it, So that was one of the things that also compounded, But now I got this, this fraud thing going on. So now the account's shut down. I have to get a new debit card. And of course, it always happened. I would always find out about it on a Friday, which meant you had to, guess what? Wait till the weekend. And then, of course, you'd start working again on Monday, and then you had to have time to actually physically go down there to the bank, or have time to be able to sit on the phone until you were able to talk to somebody and still be able to prove who you were and be able to come up with the right answers. But of all this mess, and like I said, every single one of these topics, insurance, Medicare, hospice, in-home care, your wife passing, in general, or, life insurance, 401k, medical bills, looking into retirement, and then, of course, you have passwords, PIN numbers, account numbers you need to remember, or be able to figure out where they're at and find them. Every single one of these topics, these topics alone is worth its own little video. Conclusion. Nobody ever wants to talk about that fact of, especially, like for me, it was my wife. She was the one that took care of the finances. For others out there, it might be your husband out there that, is taking care of all the finances all along. And, you don't want to wake up one day and realizing that, well, now that they're gone, now you have to try to pick up the pieces. You have to try to, figure out, where all this information's at, even simple things like, well, I think that piece of document or paperwork's in the site, in the firebox, all locked up, in case, it was one of those things, Hey, if there's a fire, grab that box. That's the things that we need in case the house burns down or, something, happens like a hurricane. That's why it's in that particular box too. Hopefully, if that happens, you'll be able to still find that box and open it up. Yeah. Where's that key at? I might be laughing about it now, but believe me, February, March, the beginning of this year, I wasn't laughing about the fact that I couldn't find the goddamn freaking key to open up the goddamn safe box. Or trying to finally get into a filing cabinet too, that I never even, it never dawned on me. What? She has this lock too? Well, where the hell's that key at? Oh my gosh. And then of course you got, everything else going on in your life, you got, I'm still dealing with work. I'm dealing with the dogs. I'm dealing with the fact of, uh, well, I only had Sandy at that time, but, she was going through her meltdown. I was having a meltdown. Um, and then, other people, when they were calling, I was calling, and I was probably ticking off too many people because I was asking for help, and they didn't know. They didn't necessarily need to know, but I was just wanting the comforting, give that person some assurance, Oh, I'm doing too much rambling. My point is, nobody wants to talk about it, but it needs to be talked about. Don't keep putting it off. Especially now that we're in the holiday season, don't put it off. Because what? Unfortunately, it's this time of the year that things like this start to happen. It's like that particular person, I really think that Dorothy really knew. Deep down, she knew. Because, prior to all of this happening in 2024 was when I started to bring up questions. And she actually started to do things like, okay, I'll go see the doctor and finally get that blood work that they've been wanting me to get, By that time, it was too late. But it was things that we were doing, so we thought we were progressing. But in her mind had already had it figured out that, no, she just wanted to make it through Christmas, make it through the next, into the new year, and she kept saying, I just have this stuff to deal with, and she would do that. Once I get this stuff to deal with, everything will be fine. And yeah, that was her stuff to deal with. She was wanting to exit stage right, So take that time, have those conversations, especially with your significant other, on what your plans are, where to find this information, where's the passwords? Where's the keys at? Nobody wants to talk about it, but it needs to happen, And those conversations need to happen with the family members too, because that's what happens to your family members is, nobody talks about it. So somebody like myself takes it upon themselves to take care of stuff, and they get offended and go their own merry way. Hit that like button. We're only at the very beginning of this adventure of my new life. So there's many more many more side roads to be conquered on this one. Let me tell you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see everybody on the next side road.